welcome to another episode of Codo Cinema, the podcast show where I talk about movies. I'm your host, Mark Codo, aka Codoman. Well, folks, I got another Disney movie to talk about. Now, this one also came out in 1940, and if you read that title correctly, I'm going to talk about Walt Disney's Pinocchio, which came out in the year 1940, the same year as Walt Disney's Fantasia. Pinocchio is a 1940 American animated musical fantasy film produced by Walt Disney Productions and released by RKO Radio Pictures, loosely based on Carlo Collodi's 1883 Italian children's novel, The Adventures of Pinocchio. It is the studio's second animated feature film, as well as the third animated film overall produced by an American film studio, after Disney's Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs, which came out in 1937, and Fleischer Studios' Gulliver's Travels, which came out in 1939. This film is directed by Ben Sharpstein and Hamilton Luske for supervising directors, while Bill Roberts, Norman Ferguson, Jack Kinney, Wilfred Jackson, and T. He served as sequence directors, with story by Ted Sears, Otto Englander, Webb Smith, William Cottrell, Joseph Sabo, Erdman Penner, and Aurelius Battaglia. And as I mentioned, this is based on The Adventures of Pinocchio by Carlo Collodi, produced by Walt Disney himself, with his company Walt Disney Productions being the production company while being distributed by RKO Radio Pictures. And of course, the music for this movie was provided by Lee Harline and Paul J. Smith. And it features the voices of Cliff Edwards, Dickie Jones, Christian Rubb, Walter Catlett, Charles Judels, Evelyn Venable, and Frankie Darrell. The film follows a wooden puppet named Pinocchio, who is created by an old wood carver named Geppetto, and brought to life by Blue Fairy. Wishing to become a real boy, Pinocchio must prove himself to be brave, truthful, and unselfish. Along his journey, Pinocchio encounters several characters representing the temptations and consequences of wrongdoing, as a cricket named Jiminy Cricket, who takes the role of Pinocchio's conscience, attempts to guide him in matters of right and wrong. The film was adapted by several storyboard artists from Collodi's book, and as I mentioned, Ben Sharpstein and Hamilton Luske were involved as the supervising directors, with T. He, Norman Ferguson, Jack Kinney, Wilfred Jackson, and of course Bill Roberts as the sequence directors. Pinocchio was a groundbreaking achievement in the area of effects animation, giving realistic movement to vehicles and machinery, as well as natural elements such as rain, water, lightning, smoke, and shadow. After premiering at the Center Theater in New York City on February 7th of 1940, Pinocchio was released in theaters on February 23rd, 1940, in the United States. Although it received critical acclaim and became the first animated feature film to win a competitive Academy Award, winning 2 for Best Original Score and, of course, Original Song for When You Wish Upon a Star. Although at the time of its release, it was initially a commercial failure, mainly due to World War II cutting off the European and Asian markets. It eventually made a profit after its 1945 re-release and is considered one of the greatest animated films ever made. And of course, according to Rotten Tomatoes, it has a 100% rating. Plus, the film and characters are still prevalent in pop culture, featuring at various Disney parks and other forms of entertainment. And in 1994, Pinocchio was added to the U.S. National Film Registry for being deemed culturally, historically, or aesthetically significant. And of course, with the film's popularity, there were also other adaptations as well. Plus, in 2000, a live-action made-for-television semi-remake and musical film titled Geppetto, told from Geppetto's perspective, was released via ABC. Plus, a live-action remake of the same name, directed by Robert Zemeckis, was released in 2022 on Disney+. Again, how did that live-action remake go between Disney and Robert Zemeckis?
Hey, Zemeckis, remember when you had Pinocchio in your Roger Rabbit film? We got a live-action remake of Pinocchio for you to do.
This
Yeah, that pretty much says it all. So, anyway, yes, we are going to talk about this movie. Now, I will break down this movie, plus give in my overall thoughts and trivia for this movie. On top of that, I will be giving the production background on this movie, plus a little bit of history from my side as well. So, anyway, let's get right to it. For the production history. Development for this movie started in September of 1937 during the production of Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs. Animator Norman Ferguson brought a translated version of Carlo Collodi's 1883 Italian children's novel, The Adventures of Pinocchio, to the attention of Walt Disney. After reading the book, Walt was busting his guts with enthusiasm. As Ferguson later recalled, Disney then commissioned storyboard artist Bianca Malgioli to write a new story outline for the book, but after reading it, he felt her outline was too faithful. Pinocchio was intended to be the studio's third feature after Bambi, which came out in 1942. However, due to difficulties with Bambi adapting the story and animating the animals realistically, Disney announced that Bambi would be postponed while Pinocchio would move ahead in production. Ben Sharpstein was then reassigned to supervise the production, while Jack Kinney was given directional reins. Now, unlike Snow White, which was a short story that the writers could expand and experiment with, Pinocchio was based on a novel with a very fixed, although episodic story. Therefore, the story went through drastic changes before reaching its final incarnation. In the original novel, Pinocchio is a cold, rude, ungrateful, inhuman brat that often repels sympathy and only learns his lessons the hard way. The writers decided to modernize the character and depict him similar to Edgar Bergen's dummy, Charlie McCarthy, but equally as rambunctious as the puppet in the book. The story was still being developed in the early stages of animation. So later on, early scenes animated by Frank Thomas and Ollie Johnston show that Pinocchio's design was exactly like a real wooden puppet, with a long, pointed nose, a peaked cap, and bare wooden hands. Disney, however, was not impressed with the work that was being done on the film. He felt that no one could really sympathize with such a character and called for an immediate halt in production. Fred Ward redesigned the character slightly to make him more appealing, but the design still retained a wooden feel. Young and upcoming animator Milt Kahl felt that Thomas, Johnston, and Moore were, and I quote, rather obsessed with the idea of this boy being a wooden puppet, end quote, and felt that they should, and I quote, forget that he was a puppet and get a cute little boy. You can always draw the wooden joints and make him a wooden puppet afterwards. End of quote. Co-supervisor director Hamilton Luske suggested to Kahl that he should demonstrate his beliefs by animating a test sequence. Kahl then showed Disney an animation test scene in which Pinocchio is underwater looking for his father. From this scene, Kahl re-envisioned the character by making him look more like a real boy with a child's Tyrolean hat and standard cartoon character four-fingered or three and a thumb hands with Mickey Mouse type gloves. The only parts of Pinocchio that still looked more or less like a puppet were his arms, legs, and little button wooden nose. Disney embraced Kahl's scene and immediately urged the writers to evolve Pinocchio into a more innocent, naive, somewhat coy personality reflecting Kahl's design. However, Disney discovered that the new Pinocchio was too helpless and was far too often led astray by deceiving characters. Therefore, in the summer of 1938, Disney and his story team established the character of the cricket. Originally, the talking cricket was only a minor character from Pinocchio, abruptly killed by squashing with a mallet, and who later returned as a ghost. Disney dubbed the cricket Jiminy and made him a character who would try to guide Pinocchio into the right decisions. Once the character was expanded, he was depicted as a realistic cricket with toothed legs and waving antennae, but Disney wanted something more likable. Ward Kimball has spent several months animating two sequences, a soup-eating musical number and a bed-building sequence in Snow White, which was cut from the film due to pacing reasons. Kimball was about to quit when Disney rewarded him for his work by promoting him to the supervising animator of Jiminy Cricket. Kimball then conjured up the design for Jiminy Cricket, whom he described as a little man with an egg head, and no ears. Jiminy, and I quote, was a cricket because we called him a cricket, Kimball later joked. That's pretty funny right there. Jiminy was a cricket because we called him a cricket. Get it? Cricket? Jiminy Cricket? Now, of course, going to the voice actors, and this was after the success of Snow White, Walt Disney wanted more famous voices for Pinocchio, which marked the first time an animated film had used celebrities as voice actors. He cast popular singer Cliff Edwards, also known as Ukulele Ike, as Jiminy Cricket. Disney rejected the idea of having an adult play Pinocchio and insisted that the character be voiced by a real child. He cast 11-year-old child actor Dickie Jones, who had previously been in Frank Capra's Mr. Smith Goes to Washington, which came out in 1939. He also cast Frankie Darrow as Lampwick, Walter Catlett as Honest John, Fellfowl the Fox, Evelyn Venable as the Blue Fairy, Charles Judels as both the villainous Stromboli and the Coachman, and Christian Rubb as Geppetto, whose design was even a caricature of Rubb. Another voice actor voiced Geppetto originally, but Disney recast him with Rubb after feeling that his voice was too harsh. Another voice actor recruited was Mel Blanc, and of course, to anybody who knows Mel Blanc is basically known as the man of 1,000 voices, and he has appeared in a number of Warner Brothers cartoons, most notably the Looney Tunes and Merry Melodies, and of course Bugs Bunny as well. Blanc recorded the voice of Gideon the cat in 16 days. However, it was eventually decided that Gideon would be mute, so all of Blanc's recorded dialogue was subsequently deleted except for a solitary hiccup, which was heard 3 times in the finished film. So anyway, let's move forward to the animation. Animation on the film began in January of 1938, but work on Pinocchio's animation was discontinued as the writer sought to rework his characterization and the film's narrative structure. However, animation on the film's supporting characters started in April of 1938. Animation would not resume again with the revised story until September. During the production of the film, story artist Joe Grant formed a character model department which would be responsible for building 3-dimensional clay models of the characters in the film, known as maquettes. These models were then given to the staff to observe how a character should be drawn from any given angle desired by the artists. The model makers also built working models of Geppetto's elaborate cuckoo clocks, designed by Albert Herder, as well as Stromboli's gypsy wagon and wooden cage, and the coachman's carriage. However, owing to the difficulty of animating a realistic movie vehicle, the artists filmed the carriage maquettes on a miniature set using stop-motion animation. Then each frame of the animation was transferred onto animation cells using an early version of a Xerox. The cells were then painted on the back and overlaid on top of the background images with the cells of the characters to create the completed shot on the rostrum camera. Like Snow White, live-action footage was shot for Pinocchio, with the actors playing the scenes in pantomime, supervised by Lusk. Rather than tracing, which would result in stiff, unnatural movement, the animators used the footage as a guide for animation by studying human movement and then incorporating some poses into the animation through slightly exaggerated. Pinocchio was a groundbreaking achievement in the area of effects animation led by Joshua Beder, in contrast to the character animators who concentrate on the acting of the characters. Effects animators create everything that moves other than the characters, vehicles, machinery, and natural effects such as rain, lightning, snow, smoke, shadows, and water, as well as the fantasy or science fiction type effects like the pixie dust of Peter Pan, which came out in 1953. The influential abstract animator Oscar Fischinger, who mainly worked on Fantasia, contributed to the effects animation of the Blue Fairy's wand. Effects animator Sandy Strother kept a diary about his year-long animation of the water effects, which included splashes, ripples, bubbles, waves, and the illusion of being underwater. To help give depth to the ocean, the animators put more detail into the waves on the water surface in the foreground, and put in less detail as the surface moved further back. After the animation was traced onto cells, the assistant animators would trace it once more with blue and black pencil leads to give the waves a sculptured look. To save time and money, the splashes were kept impressionistic. These techniques enabled Pinocchio to be one of the first animated films to have highly realistic effects animation. Ollie Johnston called it one of the finest things in studios ever done. As Frank Thomas said, the water looks so real a person can drown in it, and they do. It says enough when the animation in this movie is very realistic, and I can literally agree with the production on this movie. Walt Disney and his crew really tried to work real hard on this movie, because keep in mind, this is their second animated feature film after Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs, so they really upped the stakes on this. And the end result of this movie is very impressive, especially the water sequences, most notably at the end of the movie, because Pinocchio and Jiminy Cricket are underwater trying to find Geppetto, only to be attacked by Monstro the whale twice, right? It happens twice in that movie, because first time was when they were underwater, the second time when they were above the water and they're being chased to get back to land. So yeah, so that's a production of this movie. Now, just to give him my brief history on Pinocchio. Now, I grew up watching this movie when I was little. This is one of my favorite Walt Disney animated feature films, and of course, I got the DVD of Pinocchio. I'm pretty sure it's the one that came out in I want to say the early 2010s. I got it in the early sometime. I mean, I could be now. I got it probably late 2000s, early 2010s. That's probably when I got it on DVD. Now I remember watching it on home video, and I enjoyed the movie. Although I was scared of the final chase between Monstro and Pinocchio. Like the final chase alone. It really scared me, especially Monstro's teeth. Like, my goodness. Even as a kid. I saw this as a kid. And, man, seeing Monstro up close was really, really scary. Especially his final charge when Pinocchio was at land. And Monstro just literally jumps and hits his face on the cliff side, sending Pinocchio and Geppetto inside the cave and onto shore, right? Like, man, it's the shot it's the shot of Monstro's face being closed up, and he's literally about to he's literally on his final wave, about to kill Pinocchio and Geppetto with his entire body and face. My goodness, that was scary. His teeth were really scary the first time I saw it. I was completely shocked by it. But now that I'm older, it doesn't really scare me as much. But still, that was an intense scene. That was an intense scene. But there are some scenes in this movie that are not only intense, but also creepy and scary too. Keep in mind. And let's be honest. This is one of those movies where it does go into dark territory, because keep in mind, the original book was also dark too. Although the movie itself is a bit different, they still retain the elements from the book. So they still kept some of the darker material from the book. But I'll say this, the original book was a lot darker than this movie. Although the movie was still dark, but not as dark as the book. I think the closest that we got was Guillermo del Toro's take, which came out in 2022. That one, at the very least, had a darker tone, so it was kind of close to what the book had, although minus the World War II setting. But Walt Disney's Pinocchio was obviously one of my favorite Walt Disney animated feature films. The animation, the characters, including the title character himself. I mean, I enjoyed it. Even the music in this movie is really really good, especially When You Wish Upon a Star. And I'm saying this right now. When You Wish Upon a Star is arguably the Walt Disney theme for Walt Disney Pictures. So anyway, I've seen this movie many. So I've seen this movie many times. I've seen this movie many times when I was little. Although I started watching it in preparation for this episode because obviously enough, this movie is celebrating its 85th anniversary. So technically, this movie is 85 years old. That's right, 85 years old. It's the same age as Walt Disney's Fantasia, which came out in 1940. Both of these movies came out in 1940. It's sad that these movies bombed at the box office due to World War II, but at the very least, it got a re-release and, of course, made its money back. I mean, the film's budget, the budget for Walt Disney's Pinocchio is $2.6 million. And that movie went on to make $164 million. And that's basically after the re-release. And around 1940, Disney only recouped $1 billion by late 1940, with studio reports of the film's final original box office take varying between $1.4 to $1.9 million. So apparently, this movie did not do well at the box office, and like I mentioned, this was due to World War II cutting off the European and Asian markets overseas. So that's the reason why it didn't make its money back. But thankfully, after the re-releases, it made more money. So the movie, counting its re-release, made an overall box office of $164 million. So it found success in later years. So that's amazing right there. And of course, it won 2 Academy Awards. One of them is obviously for When You Wish Upon a Star, and of course, Best Original Score for Lee Harline and Paul J. Smith. So anyway, with that being said, that's my background on this movie, and of course, my history with this movie as well. So anyway, it's time to wish upon a star because it's time for me to break down Walt Disney's Pinocchio. So the movie opens up with the musical number When You Wish Upon a Star being sung by Jiminy Cricket himself, and the voice actor who plays Jiminy Cricket is Cliff Edwards. Like, the opening number alone, like, literally, right out of the gates, it's basically the opening number with the credits rolling. It shows the people involved in making this movie, minus the voice actors, and, back in the day, Disney didn't credit the voice actors in early animated films. So for Pinocchio, just as an example, the reason why the voice actors for Pinocchio were not given the credit because Disney wanted to preserve the illusion that the characters were real and not just voices brought to life by the actors. And that was a practice intended to enhance the viewing experience and maintain the magic of the animated world. However, this practice ended in 1944 with the release of The Three Caballeros. So that's the reason why Disney didn't credit the voice actors. It's just basically the crew members who were working on this movie. That's obviously the reason why it had to be that way up until a certain point. So anyway, after the music, so then When You Wish Upon a Star, as I mentioned, obviously the main theme for Walt Disney, and of course the one that won the Academy Award for Best Original Song. I mean, it was sung by Jiminy Cricket himself, and he sings it very good. Really, really good in a low voice up until he hits the high note. Now, of course, we do see Jiminy Cricket introducing the movie as well. And if you look closely during the final moments of the number, there are 2 books. One of them features Peter Pan and Alice in Wonderland, and I believe it's on the left-hand side if you watch it. There are 2 books that are basically Alice in Wonderland and Peter Pan, and I think the reason because those movies were in early development. Unfortunately, those movies didn't come out until the 50s. But anyway, that's about it for that part. So this movie takes place in late 19th century Italy, and Jiminy Cricket is being played by Cliff Edwards, who, as I mentioned, sings the opening number, introduces the story, and he travels to Italy during the late 19th century, and he's just basically, hopping around, right? just to, since the cricket is a bug, bugs just gotta find someplace warm, right? So he hops on over to the house of a woodcarver named Geppetto. So Jiminy Cricket hops on over like dun 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 and looks right into the house. And he sees the fireplace, and what does he do next? Jiminy Cricket goes in. So anyway, Jiminy Cricket sneaks inside of the house, I should say, and he goes over by the fireplace, picks out a piece of coal or charcoal or whatever it is, and he warms himself up because obviously it's cold outside. Takes a look inside Geppetto's house. It's basically full of toys, marionettes, and cuckoo clocks. And of course he comes across a little wooden puppet. So a puppet. And when Jimmy Cricket decides to take a good close look at Pinocchio, making sure that it's made of wood, which it is. It's made of pine. And no, not the crisp pine type of way. After that, oh my goodness, I still can't get that out of my mind. The fact that they had to throw in a crisp pine joke in the live-action remake of Pinocchio. But anyway, Geppetto, Figaro, the cat, and Cleo the fish all come out to see the little wooden puppet. And he's drawing out lines for eyebrows and a mouth, just so Pinocchio can smile, right? And Jiminy Cricket sees it all. So Geppetto names the wooden puppet Pinocchio. He asks Cleo and Figaro if the two like the name, and both the cat and the fish disagree. So Geppetto's like, "Oh, let the little puppet decide. Do you like that name?" And he uses the strings on Pinocchio and just to make him nod, and Pinocchio's like, "Yep." So anyway, I mean, let's be honest. Geppetto had the final say on this. So Geppetto names the wooden puppet Pinocchio. So basically, Pinocchio, Figaro, and Cleo, basically, I forgot the name of the number, but I think it's called Little Wooden Head. I always thought it was Little Wooden Boy because obviously Pinocchio is a boy, but is obviously Little Wooden Head. That's the name of the musical number. But anyway, they're basically singing, even to the point where Jiminy Cricket blends himself into one of the to be a musician when Geppetto walks on in with Pinocchio, just so he doesn't squish Jiminy Cricket. And Jiminy Cricket is like, just being a band member for a short time. But anyway, after that musical number is done, Geppetto, Figaro, and Cleo go to sleep for the night. And also to bring this up, while I'm bringing this up, yes, I'm going back to what I said about Alice in Wonderland and Peter Pan. Those are obviously references to Disney movies, and a nice little foreshadow to the future of Disney movies. There is another mention where Geppetto makes Figaro say goodnight to Cleo, although Figaro gives a little kiss to Cleo on the fishbowl. I think on Cleo's fishbowl, and Geppetto's like, "Now go to sleep, my little mermaid. Good night." Gee, I wonder what that foreshadows to. Wink, wink. But anyway, yeah, everyone goes to bed. By the way, I forgot to mention, Clarence Nash, who voices Donald Duck, he makes the cat noise for Figaro. Just to throw this out there, I completely forgot to mention that part. But anyway, I'm saying that right now. But anyway, Jiminy Cricket also sleeps. He sleeps on the neck of the violin, just for a bed, right? And before Geppetto goes to bed, he has a little smoking pipe and he smokes for a little bit until he puts the pipe down and tries to go to sleep, and then he tells Figaro to open the window because Geppetto forgets to open the window, and Figaro's like, screw this, I'll open it. So Figaro opens the window until Geppetto sees the wishing star, and he wishes upon a star And the wish that he wants is for Pinocchio to become a real live boy. And as Geppetto sleeps, um, Jiminy Cricket wakes up to the sounds of cuckoo clocks going off. I mean, they're not literally going off. They're just basically, making the ticking noise, like tick, 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 right? They're just basically ticking away, and Jiminy Cricket gets ticked off because of the noise. And of course the final nail in the coffin comes in when Geppetto and Cleo snores, right? And he is completely annoyed by it. It's like he hears Geppetto snoring. It's just hilarious. Everyone's sleeping until the snores come in, right? Including Cleo, who's sleeping underwater. It's just so fun. Until Jiminy Cricket tells everyone to quiet. And I'm not kidding. All the gears on the cuckoo clocks stopped. And the last thing before Jiminy Cricket goes to sleep, he says, "After all, enough is enough." Something like that. Until then, a shiny star comes in, and Jiminy was like, "Now what's up?" Unfortunately, that shiny star is coming towards, the window, and it turns out, what Jiminy Cricket doesn't realize, and he's like, "Hey, what's going on here?" Jiminy Cricket doesn't realize that it's the blue fairy who comes in, because, like I said, Geppetto makes a wish on a star. And the blue fairy, who's being voiced by Evelyn Venable, arrives and grants the wish partially. So the blue fairy walks up to Pinocchio. Well, first she walks over to Geppetto and says, "Good Geppetto, you have brought so much good. You deserve your wish is deserved to be granted." And then goes over to Pinocchio and she says, "Little puppet made of pine, awake," as she brings life to Pinocchio. So anyway, Pinocchio has come to life, and Pinocchio is being voiced by Dickie Jones, and Pinocchio must prove himself worthy before becoming a real boy. However, being naive, he requires some guidance, and the Blue Fairy appoints Jiminy Cricket to be his conscience. And Jiminy hears the conversation between the Blue Fairy and Pinocchio, and decides to intervene and tells the two, "Well, I'll tell you about what a conscience is. A conscience is basically a small voice telling you of like what's right and wrong." This gets Jiminy Cricket to turn red, because when Jiminy sees the Blue Fairy for the first time, oh boy, Jiminy falls in love. Because the first day the Blue Fairy tells Jiminy Cricket, "Would you like to be his conscience?" Like, she smiles at him, and Jiminy's like, uh-huh. Yep. Hey, you can't say no to a Blue Fairy like that, Jiminy. So Jiminy Cricket tells the name that, "Oh yeah, I'm Crickets. I'm Cricket. Jiminy Cricket." And Blue Fairy tells Jiminy Cricket to kneel, as she appoints Jiminy Cricket to be his conscience. So she uses her wand to appoint Jiminy Cricket, but the thing is, she turns Jiminy Cricket's old suit that he wore, like he wears an old beat up jacket. It's a beat up green jacket, beat up shoes, and a top hat that lost its top. And he basically gets a new uniform, shiny shoes, and of course new hat and an umbrella as well. Then that's basically the Jiminy Cricket suit that we know that we know from this movie. So then anyway, but unfortunately Jiminy was like, will I get a badge for this?" And the Blue Fairy is like, "Well, we'll see. Will it be made of gold?" And then before the Blue Fairy leaves, she tells Pinocchio to remember, be a good boy, and always let your conscience be your guide. So the Blue Fairy disappears, and the Cricket tells Pinocchio that anytime he needs Jiminy, all he needs to do is whistle. And this leads into another musical number, which is basically "Give a Little Whistle," which is both sung by Cliff Edwards and Dickie Jones. And this is basically, Jiminy Cricket telling Pinocchio to, "Hey, give a little whistle." Just to, if he needs if just for the help, Jiminy just so Pinocchio needs Jiminy Cricket's help. And of course, Jiminy whistles 3 times for Pinocchio on the last whistle. Jiminy starts to dance and hopped onto the shelf to sing to him, blows the whistle on his top hat, hit the echo, and dances on the shelf. Pinocchio does the same thing, but nothing comes out of it. But Jiminy says, "Pucker up and blow!" And he does that on a big jug, like the bass music. And Pinocchio stands up to sing until Jiminy Cricket bounces on the violin with the violin string on his feet to slide up and down before he walks to sing. And always let your conscience be your guide until the string breaks to snap. Just to snap out of it, right? So then, of course, Jiminy Cricket basically walks around the house. Smells a little pipe that Geppetto had to smoke into. Bounces, and then which basically it just makes Jiminy high, and then falling off the shelf, bouncing on the wooden plane on the workbench, basically, and then of course. He falls off, bounces on the saw that makes a whistle sound, and then gets a parade going from one of the cuckoo clocks until he sings the last. Oh, obviously, until then, a little parade comes out of the cuckoo clock. It's basically a Swiss family. I wonder if that's a reference to Swiss Family Robinson. I don't know, or maybe just the fact that it's basically a Swiss family from Switzerland, I guess, that is on the cuckoo clock. Probably, I guess it's a double entendre. But anyway, Jiminy Cricket sings the last Jiminy and Pinocchio sing the last few lyrics. And always let your conscience be your guide. And always let your conscience be your guide. That musical number gets interrupted because Pinocchio trips over the paint cans, falls from the workbench and onto the floor, and that wakes up Geppetto and the animals as they're wondering what's going on. As they're wondering what's going on. Geppetto's like, "Who's there?" Pinocchio's like, "It's me." But Geppetto's like, "Oh, okay." But Geppetto's like, "Oh, whoa, 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 hold on. Figaro, someone's in the house." So anyway, Geppetto walks out of his bed, holds an Italian pistol from the pillow, and I'm just like, where did he get that pistol from? I know it's a gun, but I wonder if it's a pistol or something. I don't know. Like, he holds that in his hand, and both him and Figaro are basically walking around the house to see who's in the house. But of course, we all know it's Pinocchio. And what happens next? Pinocchio scares the crap out of Figaro by saying, "Here I am!" Figaro jumps for his life, hits Geppetto, the gun goes off, including all the cuckoo clocks, right? Of course, Geppetto sees Pinocchio on the ground, and he was like, "Oh, how did you get down there? Oh, you can talk." And Pinocchio's like, "Yeah, I can talk." Geppetto's like, "No, this must be a dream. I gotta wake up. Wake me up." And he pours like a jug of water on his head just to wake up, right? And Geppetto's like, "Now let's get to the bottom of this." And Geppetto sees Pinocchio once more. And he's like, "Go on, say something." But Pinocchio talks again. He's like, "You're funny. Do it again." And Geppetto's like, "You do talk." And that's true because the blue fairy brought Pinocchio to life. So then another celebration comes in. And unfortunately, the party ended quickly because Pinocchio puts his wooden finger on a little candle, and because both him and Figaro were just playing around with it. But unfortunately, you know what fire does to wood? It burns. So Geppetto, who was carrying a bunch of toys, tosses the toys in the air and grabs Pinocchio just so he can find water to extinguish it. Jiminy Cricket comes running in with a hat full of water, but unfortunately Jiminy tripped and landed inside his hat with the water. So the only thing that he had to do was the only thing that Geppetto had to do was extinguish the fire inside Cleo's fishbowl. Oh boy, Cleo's gonna have a rough night right there. I'm pretty sure Geppetto gave Cleo some fresh water after that, because the water in Cleo's fishbowl is pure black, and Cleo coughs the smoke out. So then Geppetto and Pinocchio go to sleep, and Jiminy Cricket sleeps in a in a matchbox, and all three of them, including Figaro and Cleo, all go to sleep after a little celebration. So then, the next morning, Geppetto sends Pinocchio off to school. He gives him a book and, of course, an apple as well. But unfortunately, Jiminy Cricket is still asleep in the matchbox. And while that's going on, all the kids are going to school. All the kids are going to school, and while that's going on, a wily fox named John Worthington Foulfellow, or should I say Honest John, being played by Walter Catlett, along with his buddy Gideon, who, as I mentioned, is being played by Mel Blanc. As I mentioned, Mel Blanc's dialogue was deleted, except for his hiccups. The two are walking past the kids who are going to school, and Honest John and Gideon are just walking into town until Honest John sees a poster of Stromboli's puppet show, who is basically, doing a traveling show in town. And Honest John was like, well, Stromboli! So that rascal is back in town. While Honest John is talking to Gideon about the puppet show, Pinocchio walks by the two of them, and Honest John's like, "Why, look at that, a wooden boy!" And then Honest John turns around and says, "Oh, look, a wooden boy!" And this gives Honest John and Gideon an idea to, take Pinocchio to the puppet show that Stromboli is hosting, right? And basically, Honest John's like, "That's it, Stromboli! Why? That'll be a good idea for me to bring Pinocchio to Stromboli." Obviously, they're kind of doing that to make, plenty of cash, right? Because those two guys, Honest John and Gideon, are basically con artists, if that's the way to put it. But yeah, so anyway, Honest John and Gideon basically, they're basically following Pinocchio, although they're basically stalkers at this point. Because they're basically following Pinocchio, because they want to take Pinocchio to Stromboli's show. And of course, Honest John just gives the idea of like tripping Pinocchio over, thinking, oh yeah, oh wait, that's just an accident, just to make an accident. And Honest John does that. He trips Pinocchio over with his cane, but he did that just be casual, right? He just stands, like he just puts his cane right in front, right behind him, just make it look like it's a stick that Pinocchio is going to trip over, which he did. He trips over, helps Pinocchio up, and then basically reads Pinocchio's book, eats his apple. But unfortunately, Honest John and Gideon basically invite Pinocchio to the show. Basically he tempted Pinocchio's like, "Oh, you'll be a good actor, a celebrity, an actor's life," which actually leads into the musical number "Hi Diddly Dee," which is the song that Honest John sings. Basically, "Hi Diddly Dee, an actor's life for me." That's basically the song that's basically the song that he sings in this movie. Basically, he sings it while taking Gideon and Pinocchio to Stromboli's show. And while that's going on, Jiminy Cricket is basically running around just to, find Pinocchio, because Jiminy Cricket overslept and basically late for the first day and late for work. He's basically late for work. Don't worry, there are no seagulls involved in this sequence, at least until the whale comes in. So, just to let y'all know. But anyway, Jiminy Cricket thinks that there's a parade going on, but he hears Pinocchio's voice. He's like, "Pinocchio, what are you doing?" So Jiminy Cricket stops the trio, and by whistling, and what happens next is that Gideon sees Jiminy Cricket on top of Honest John's hat, while Honest John's trying to calm Pinocchio down. Gideon pulls out a wooden mallet and smacks Honest John's hat inside him. He basically missed Jiminy Cricket, And of course, this is also a little nod. This is also a clever in joke because in the original book, Pinocchio was the one who kills Jiminy Cricket with a mallet. And it's also funny too is that there's another in joke in Guillermo del Toro's Pinocchio where the handle of the mallet squishes Jiminy Cricket by accident, and that was like a little funny nod to that as well. But anyway, Pinocchio. So anyway, Pinocchio and Jiminy Cricket have a little conversation. I mean, Pinocchio tells Jiminy Cricket that, "Oh no, don't worry about this guy. This guy's my friend. His name is Honest John." And Jiminy Cricket's like, "Honest John? Dude, this guy's trying to bring you to a puppet show. I mean, listen, you gotta go to school, right?" So Jiminy protests and tells Pinocchio that he should honor his father's wish and go to school, convincing Pinocchio that this is his chance. And of course, this is basically, convincing Pinocchio. And of course, this is basically, Jiminy Cricket telling Pinocchio, "Hey, you want to be a good boy? You got to tell Honest John, thank you very much, but I'm sorry, I gotta go to school. That's the main thing." But unfortunately, that did not work because Honest John finds Pinocchio. Is like, there you are. That's basically after Gideon had to like get the hat off of Honest John by basically smacking him with the mallet once more. Oh my goodness, Honest John's gonna get a headache after this. Why did Gideon have to do Honest John dirty like that? I mean, let's be honest, Honest John hit Gideon with the mallet on the head before, so I guess that was kind of payback or something. I don't know. Yeah, just don't be crude. So yeah, just don't be crude next time, okay, Gideon? Unfortunately, there won't be a next time for these two later on in the movie. So anyway, Gideon and John take Pinocchio to Stromboli's show, but Jiminy Cricket decides to follow once more, and he was like, but before that, he was like, "Oh, what do I do? I'll go tell Pinocchio's father. Wait a minute, that'll be snitching. I'll go after him myself." So then later on, Honest John and Gideon take Pinocchio to Stromboli, who is hosting the marionette show, who's basically hosting the puppet show. Also, Stromboli is being played by Charles Judels. He basically opens the show up. He's basically the marionette master, and he basically opens the show up, tells everyone about the puppet show, and then of course introduces a new member, Pinocchio. But of course, Jiminy Cricket shows up and he sees a huge crowd out there, right? And Jimmy's like, "Wow, looks like a sellout." I mean, to be fair, that's the whole thing about this puppet show. It's basically a sellout show. I mean, let's be honest, Honest John and Gideon sell out too. But anyway, Pinocchio shows off his acting talents with a musical number, "I Got No Strings on Me," which is the name of the number. And he's basically clumsy at one point where he trips down the stairs for a little bit. And of course, he sings the number, and then of course more marionettes come in just to, dance, right? And I think there are also other people who are holding the other marionettes as well. And Jiminy Cricket is basically he doesn't really pay attention that much up until the end. Where there's like a bunch of Russian marionettes, doing their Russian dances, and of course spinning around as well. While Pinocchio does that too, he spins around until he crashes into them. It says the last number, "There are no strings on me." And then everyone laughs and cheers, and basically Pinocchio became a success. And Jiminy Cricket is like, they like it. So this comes to the point where Jiminy Cricket realized that, okay, maybe I don't need Pinocchio anymore, coming to realize that he failed at his job, and walks off into the night. So then later on, Geppetto, Cleo, and Figaro are about to have dinner, but unfortunately Pinocchio is not there. So Geppetto decides to look for him, right? And tells the animals, "And remember, nobody eats a bite until I come back." So yeah, but Figaro almost ate his fish, and Cleo's like, and Figaro just basically like, he has a scowl look on his face, and he was like, He's just pissed off that he's not going to eat his fried fish with butter, right? Oh man. So anyway, at Stromboli's carriage, Pinocchio and Stromboli are celebrating, like, because the show was successful. So then So then Pinocchio was about to return home for the night, and Strong Boy for a moment, like he's like, "Oh yeah, sure, go home to your father, okay." But unfortunately, Strong Boy takes Pinocchio, puts him inside a birdcage, and he was like, "There, this will be your new home, where I can find you always." And Stromboli is just like, this comes to the point where Pinocchio learns the hard way of the temptation, right? Like he's being set up by he was set up by Honest John and Gideon to to be sold out to Stromboli. That way Pinocchio can be Stromboli's puppet, right? And not wanting to lose such a cash cow makes him a competitive. Makes Pinocchio a captive in a bird cage. And then Stromboli tells Pinocchio about the places they go, London, Paris, other locations, and Pinocchio is like, "No, no, yes, 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 to me, we start tonight." And with all the money that Stromboli has, he basically keeps it. And then, of course, the final nail in the coffin is that once Pinocchio performs on stage to make money, and of course becomes too old, he will use Pinocchio as firewood. And a little dark detail comes in is that when Stromboli picks up an axe and he chucks it at an old puppet through the chest, indicating that he's going to be chopped up into firewood. And Pinocchio's like, "Let me out of here! You cannot do this to me!" Stromboli's like, "Quiet! Shut up!" Until then, Stromboli is like, "Good night, my little wooden gold mine." Like, what a greedy bastard Stromboli is, treating Pinocchio like this. But of course, as I mentioned, Pinocchio had to learn this the hard way, right? This is one of many temptations Pinocchio fell into, right? I guess that's the greed of temptation, you know? Of course, this is like the greed of temptation for Stromboli and, of course, Honest John, because Honest John and Stromboli are basically greedy bastards, right? And Pinocchio's like, "No, no, you let me out of here right now!" Like, Pinocchio tries to, force his way out of the birdcage, but unfortunately, Stromboli's carriage moves, and they're basically moving in the rain, right? Until Pinocchio tries to whistle for Jiminy Cricket to no avail, with lightning coming in. And Pinocchio, he basically cries. He's basically upset, realizing what he has done. Right? Like technically, Pinocchio kind of did it to himself at this point. But when Jiminy Cricket is out in the rain, he sees Stromboli's carriage, and he was like, as he was about to leave, he says something like, "Huh, maybe I should give him luck." Say, that's it. I'll give him some luck. Wishing Pinocchio good luck on the tour, right? But unfortunately, Jiminy Cricket finds out from Pinocchio that Stromboli's going to chop him up as the firewood, right? So Jiminy tries to free Pinocchio from the birdcage, but unfortunately to no avail because the lock is an old lock. And then while that's going on, Geppetto is out in the rain looking for Pinocchio. He's basically shouting, "Pinocchio! Pinocchio!" Let's be honest, Tom Hanks kind of did it too. "Pinocchio!" While that's going on, Stromboli he crosses paths with Geppetto a little bit, but he doesn't know that was Geppetto, and his carriage comes on by, right? His carriage comes on by, so they kind of cross paths a little bit, but they don't recognize each other. So back inside the cage, both Jiminy and Pinocchio kind of regret their actions, right? Like Pinocchio's like, "This is all my fault. I should have listened to you, Jiminy." And Jiminy was like, "Oh shucks." And Jiminy was like, "Oh shucks. It was my fault too. I should have. Oh man, it's my fault too." Like technically, it's kind of both of their faults at this point, but yeah, I could definitely see. But until then, the shooting star comes in, and it's basically the blue fairy who appears and is anxious, and is anxious on what's going on with Pinocchio. So Jiminy tells Pinocchio to tell the truth. So Pinocchio tells the blue fairy what was going on, but unfortunately, what he's saying are basically lies. Now, some of the context are true, but the rest of it are lies. And He basically was referring to the two guys, Honest John and Gideon, as two big monsters with big green eyes. Now, I think that's true. They do have green eyes, but I wouldn't say they're monsters. I mean, they're basically a fox and a cat. And then, of course, he also lied on being put in a on being put in a sack, right? You know, being covered up in a sack for him and Jiminy Cricket, which is also a lie. And then, of course, the final lie comes in and is like, oh yeah, they're gonna chop. Oh yeah, they're gonna chop me into fire. Oh yeah, they're gonna chop me into firewood, which is part of it's true, but it's basically Stromboli chopping him into fire. It's basically Stromboli trying to chop Pinocchio into firewood, not Honest John and Gideon. So anyway, the lies come in. The lies keep growing and growing on his nose. Right, his nose begin to grow, and what's basically fascinating is that his nose continues to grow, and it creates some flowers and a bird's nest as well. And Pinocchio is like, "Oh, my nose! What's happening?" And the blue fairy was like, "Perhaps you haven't been telling the truth." Perhaps, which is what Jimmy Cricket said. And Pinocchio was like, "Oh, please help me. I'm awfully sorry." But the blue fairy but the blue fairy tells Pinocchio what a lie is. Well, at least from his perspective. And she was like, "You see, Pinocchio, a lie keeps growing and growing until it is as plain as the nose on your face." Something like that. And so Pinocchio said, "I'll never lie again." And Pinocchio's like, I won't lie again. I promise." That's what Pinocchio, something like, and Pinocchio apologizes to the blue fairy, and Jiminy Cricket begs to the blue fairy to, give him another chance, right? And the blue fairy forgives him, and of course, she says, and the blue fairy forgives him and lets him out of the cage, but warns him that he'll never become human if he keeps misbehaving. If he keeps misbehaving. She also restores his nose to its original size. So basically, Jiminy and Pinocchio are free, and the two escape from Stromboli, and it isn't long before the duo becomes separated once more. So anyway, just to add more context, Jiminy and Pinocchio run back to the village, but unfortunately, what we get next is quite honestly the most creepiest scene in this movie. And that is basically Honest John and Gideon at the pub talking with this coachman. So Honest John and Gideon are basically having this conversation with the coachman, telling about their experience of like selling Pinocchio off, and the coachman is intrigued by this, and he sees the payment that Honest John has in his hands, like, and Stromboli paid plenty. Drops the bag of coins, although it's a small bag, and the coachman has this devilish look on his face, and Honest John's like, that shows you how Honest John can be, right, Gideon? And while Gideon's having his drink while also smoking, he hiccups a few times, and of course that's basically Mel Blanc's hiccups that you hear in this very scene, and that happens when Gideon was eating this smoke-filled donut, which is basically the smoke from the cigar that he's smoking. And then, of course, the other time happens when he's drinking this beer, and he's just basically chugging it until he hiccups and spills it all over his face. He was like, hiccup! So anyway, the conversation continues with Honest John telling the coachman, "So, coachman, what's your proposition?" So the coachman's like, how would you two like to make some real money?" So coachman hands the two a huge sack of gold, and Honest John's like, "Well, and who do we have to I guess he was originally going to kill, but I don't know if that, I mean, that's probably true according to Honest John, but the coachman's like, "No, nothing like that. You see?" And by the way, the coachman is also the same voice actor for Stromboli, Charles Judels, just to let y'all know. So then, both Honest John and the coachman look around the pub just so no one's around, and this leads into the creepiest moment from this movie, and it's just basically the coachman telling Honest John, "I'm collecting stupid little boys." Honest John was like, "Stupid little boys?" And I'm just like listening to this whole conversation, and when I was little, I mean, that flew over my head when I was little, but now as an adult, I'm just like, oh my goodness. Like, dude, oh my goodness. Like, the coachman is collecting stupid little boys. And of course the conversation keeps on going. Gideon even listens to it as well. And honestly, I was like, yeah, okay. So anyway, what happens next? And Coachman's like, and I take the boys to Pleasure Island. And Honest John's like, Pleasure Island. Pleasure Island? But the law! Suppose they! Because here's the thing. Honest John was like into it at one point, but then he comes to realize what he's dealing with. It seems as though that Honest John that it seems as though the coachman wants Honest John to, collect the little boys to bring them to the coachman just so that he can bring them to Pleasure Island. The last thing that came to them was like, but the last thing that came to Honest John was like, what's gonna happen to the boys? And the coachman's like, they won't come back as boys. And I'm not making this up. And the coachman tells Honest John that the boys won't come back as little boys. So indicating they'll be transforming into something else. And to anyone who has seen this movie, you know what I'm talking about, right? And when the coachman says this, he gives his face is so devilish red, it scares the crap out of Honest John and Gideon. Like, they're both scared, realizing what they're going into. So the two are basically making a deal with the devilish coachman. And of course, coachman tells Honest John and Gideon, all right now, we meet at Crossroads and don't double back. So they're basically telling the plan, right? And also tells them that the boat for Pleasure Island leaves at midnight. And of course, yes, this is basically oh my goodness, yep. Honest John and Gideon accept the job out of fear, right? Knowing what they're doing will break the law. And that's basically the creepiest scene in this movie because of the fact that the coachman is basically being a child trafficker at that point. Like, dude, my goodness. I'm just like, I mean, did the writers did this just to make it more darker or something? I don't know. The book is a lot darker, but man, this scene is basically the creepiest scene out of this. And it is a dark moment, but I think this is probably the second darkest moment because we haven't even gotten to the other dark moments yet. And man, we will get to that soon. So then Jiminy and Pinocchio try to go back home, but unfortunately Honest John and Gideon stops Pinocchio just to check in on him. But of course, they do a little doctor checkup, and of course, Honest John describes the fake diagnosis of him being allergic. Allergic to what? So he's basically Pinocchio being tired out, I guess. I guess that's the allergy right there. So anyway, the cure for Pinocchio is just basically going to Pleasure Island. And of course, Honest John gives Pinocchio a ticket, which is basically a card or something, like one of those like playing cards or something. And of course, the two take Pinocchio to the boat to Pleasure Island. And of course, Jiminy Cricket sees it all, and he's like, Pinocchio, what the hell are you doing? Hey, come back! So Jiminy Cricket once more chases down Pinocchio, and and basically Pinocchio and the boys, and of course the coachman, are driving off to this boat to go to Pleasure Island. And on the way to Pleasure Island, Pinocchio befriends Lampwick, being played by Frankie Darro, a delinquent boy with a New York accent. Hey, my name's Lampwick. What's your name? Although in the book his name is Candlewick, but of course they named him Lampwick. I guess because of the lamp, I guess. Oh, nice to meet you, Pinocchio. Wait, we are going to Pleasure Island. I heard the food is free, the rides are free, everywhere on that island is free. You know what I'm saying, right? And of course the little boys don't realize what they're getting into, right? So anyway, they all arrived at Pleasure Island without rules or authority to enforce their activity. So Pinocchio, Lampwick, and many other boys soon engage in vices such as vandalism, fighting, smoking, and drinking. And I'll say this movie will be rated PG today with the vandalism, fighting, and smoking and drinking. That movie today, if it was released today, it will get a PG rating. This movie's rated G, by the way. This movie that came out in 1940 is rated G. So anyway, Lampwick vandalizes a stained glass window, and of course the Mona Lisa painting by lighting up a cigar with a match. And of course, Pinocchio's like, yeah, being bad is a lot of fun. No, Pinocchio. Being bad is not fun. Your action has consequences. The temptations, and of course, Pinocchio falls into that temptation once more, falling into for Honest John's tricks, right? Oh boy, that's like the second time he fall into that trap now. But this time, much, much worse. So anyway, Jiminy, realizing that once again he has been too late, follows Pinocchio to Pleasure Island, where he sees the boys vandalizing and fighting, and of course, drinking beer and smoking cigars. And of course, what he doesn't realize, he doesn't see this, but while everybody's celebrating, the coachman tells like these black hooded guards to shut the doors and lock it up, and tells them to get the crates ready. And he's basically, something's gonna happen. They're basically being animals at this point. And the coachman is basically, he knows something's gonna happen. Those bad boys are gonna make a fool out of themselves, huh? That's something that he said, but we all know what's gonna happen. So anyone who has seen this movie, you know what I'm talking about, right? So then anyway, inside this 8-bar pub, Pinocchio and Lampwick are having the time of their lives, playing pool and sucking on their cigars, for smoking. And Pinocchio kind of like he sucks on it so much that he swallows the part of the cigar, and his face turns green. Basically he's basically tripping, right? He's basically tripping while being sick. And Lampwick's like, some good stuff, huh? Pinocchio's like, ooh yeah, that's good crap, while also being high and sick. So Pinocchio tries to, play pool for a little bit, but unfortunately he gets interrupted by Jiminy Cricket, and Pinocchio smashes his cigar, and Jiminy was like, so this is what you're doing right now. How do you expect to be a real boy? Look at this. Look at yourself. Smoking. Playing pool. Jiminy hits his foot on the, I guess it's an 8-ball, I believe. He tries to take Pinocchio home, but unfortunately Lampwick picks up Jiminy Cricket, and is like, hey, what's this little bug doing? And Pinocchio explains, oh, Jiminy Cricket's my conscience. He tells me from right and wrong. And Lampwick was like, what? You mean to tell me you take orders from a grasshopper? And Jiminy gets offended by saying, grasshopper? Look here, you want to take orders from your grasshopper, or your conscience, if you have one. And Lampwick's like, yeah, whatever, you little bug. And Lampwick hits Jiminy Cricket inside one of the holes of the pool table, because that's where many of the pool balls go to. And Jiminy is angry, and he's like, whoa, anyway, I'm gonna knock your lights off. He's gonna try to fight Lampwick, although let's be honest, Lampwick is 10 times his size. He will squish Jiminy Cricket like a bug. But Pinocchio stops Jiminy and is like, don't do it, Jiminy, he's my friend. Jiminy was like, your best friend? And what am I? Just your conscience. And Jiminy was like, what the hell, screw it. That settles it. And of course, Pinocchio was like, wait, Jiminy, what are you doing? And Jiminy was like, you made your bed, now sleep in it. And this leads into another funny moment where Jiminy's like walking away, but he falls into the hole of the pool table, and of course gets launched out of it after hitting one of the pool balls. And Lampwick laughs at it. He laughs at it all, and Jiminy was like, ha ha ha! Go on, laugh, make a jackass out of yourself. I'm through. This is the end. So Jiminy leaves, and he basically tells himself, Lampwick, And Lampwick was like, come on, let him go. So, and he says that while Lampwick is pouring beer, right? And of course, Jiminy is walking into the desolation of Pleasure Island. Basically, Pleasure Island at this point is being desolated, and he's like, "I have enough of this bullshit. I'm taking the next boat out of here." And Jiminy was like, "Open up that door! Open up! I want to go home." Unfortunately, he doesn't realize that the door, although technically he knows that the door is locked, but unfortunately, what comes next is that he hears the sound of donkey noises. So he investigates, and what he sees is that there's a bunch of donkeys inside the crates, and the coachman telling the men to bring the donkeys on board the ship. To they're basically being sold off. They're basically being sold off to different locations. Like, one of them is being, like, if you pay attention to one of the crates has like one of them being sold off to the circus, and then the other one is basically going to a gold mine, or maybe a regular mine or some sort. But that's like, those are like little details right there. And then he finds out that one of the donkeys is still talking, puts one of the donkeys back, with the other donkeys are basically, still talking, and they're basically begging the coachman that they don't want to be donkeys anymore. They're like, "Please, please, no, please, please, we don't want to be bad anymore. Let us go." And the coachman's like, "Quiet! You boys had your fun. Now pay for it." And Jiminy's basically in donkey hell at this point, and he was like, "Boys, so that explains why there are donkeys. Pinocchio!" So Jiminy runs back to the 8-Ball pub, and he's trying to rescue and he's trying to he's going back for Pinocchio at this point. And Lampwick is like, "Yeah, if I see that little beetle again, yeah." And Lampwick was like, "Screw that beetle. You think that something's going to happen." Until then, Lampwick is slowly transforming into his donkey form a little bit, and the first thing that comes off is that his ears change into donkey ears, and Pinocchio sees it. So Pinocchio, like, he doesn't even drink his beer. He just puts it down and pushes it away on the table, and then Lampwick grows a donkey tail, and he's like, "Conscious, phooey." And Pinocchio sees the donkey tail from Lampwick, and Pinocchio throws his cigar away, realizing that, "Oh, are these things turning me into a donkey or something?" And of course, Lampwick's face changed right after he says, "How do you expect to be a real boy? What you think I look like? A jackass?" And when I heard him said that, I'm just like, whoa, whoa, whoa. But of course, given the context, a donkey is basically a jackass, but also but also it does foreshadow, and this film actually kind of does, and this film, to be quite honest, does a really good job on foreshadowing the boys turning into donkeys, because it kind of gives you hints on what's gonna happen. Like the first time you see that. Now I'm pointing out a couple of moments from that movie. The first time that this happens is the fact that the coachman is riding his coach with the donkeys, having them move the coachman's coach, and then of course you hear Jiminy Cricket says, "Go on, laugh, make a jackass out of yourself." And then of course there's also a donkey symbol on one of the chairs in the 8-Ball pub. So it didn't spoon feed you the information, it just hinted and foreshadowed on what's going to happen. And it does happen in the book too, although the name of the island is basically, I forgot what the name of the original island was called, but for the movie they call it Pleasure Island. But yes, this film does a good job foreshadowing the donkey transformation. And after Lampwick says, "What do you think I look like, a jackass?" and Pinocchio is like, "You sure do." Pinocchio laughs until he makes donkey noises. Lampwick was like, "Hey, you act like a donkey." But unfortunately, Lampwick makes donkey noises too. And he was like, "Did that come out of me?" And then the music kicks in when Lampwick comes to the realization that he is transformed into a donkey while being double-crossed. And he was like, "I'm being double-crossed!" And this is like going back to what I'm saying. Your action has consequences, right? all the boys on Pleasure Island were acting like jackasses. And and it's at the point where Lampwick can't really turn back at this point, but he tries to beg for Pinocchio to get help. Pinocchio is basically helpless at this point. He is scared to death on the whole transformation of Lampwick turning to a donkey. Like, we see Lampwick's hands on Pinocchio's overall straps, and his hands turn into hoofs until Lampwick until you see a silhouette shot of both Pinocchio and Lampwick as Lampwick begins his final transformation into a donkey, and his last words was "Mama," and it's just basically him wanting his mom. And that alone, that whole scene alone is the darkest and scariest moment from this movie. And I'm not kidding. And this is probably the most terrifying scene to come for this movie because of the whole donkey transformation. But it's also the fact that Pinocchio is seeing all of it. He is helpless. He is clueless. He is scared. He is scared to death on seeing Lampwick, who he knows for only a few minutes, being turned into a donkey. And Lampwick, as a donkey, basically kicks everything inside the pub bar, inside the 8 bar pub. He destroys the whole pub until Pinocchio starts to grow ears and tails of a donkey. And then of course Jiminy Cricket runs in and he finds Pinocchio, and Pinocchio's like, Jiminy, help! And Jiminy is like, Pinocchio, all the boys are turned into donkeys. And Jiminy is like, oh, you too! So both Jiminy and Pinocchio escape the pub before they were being chased by the coachman, although we don't see the coachman at this point. Although we don't see the coachman chasing them, but I think it leads to the visualization that they're going after Pinocchio. Although we don't see it, but I think the music says it all. The music really says it all, that Pinocchio and Jiminy are running away, but they're basically they're basically running away from the coachman trying to catch them. I mean, like I said, we don't see the coachman chasing them, but the music says it all. And then of course, Pinocchio and Jiminy jump off a cliff and they basically escape Pleasure Island. So anyway, Jiminy and Pinocchio return to Geppetto's workshop, but unfortunately, they've come to realize that the workshop is deserted. And Pinocchio and Jiminy are on the front doorstep. They're saying, maybe something awful happened to him. But it wasn't until a dove arrives with a note from the Blue Fairy explaining that Geppetto has gone to sea to search for his lost son. And Jiminy reads the letter, and it's basically, Geppetto was looking for Pinocchio until he gets swallowed by a whale. And Jiminy is like, a whale? A whale named Monstro, and is now trapped in its belly at the bottom of the sea. So then Pinocchio and Jiminy go, and then Pinocchio, who is basically being brave at this point, he's going to find his father Geppetto. So anyway, both Jiminy and Geppetto go to the bottom of the sea, and they're basically walking around. Like, Pinocchio has a heavy rock on his tail just so he doesn't float back up. So is Jiminy, although at one point he puts it in his hat, but unfortunately that doesn't work, so he puts the rock in his pants. Unfortunately, there's like a little fish that looks over Jiminy, and let's just say Jiminy doesn't get the privacy he needs at that point. So the little fish follows Jiminy around until until the fish grabs Jiminy's umbrella, and Jiminy tries to tell the fish to to go away, but unfortunately Mama Fish comes in and tries to tell Jiminy, what are you trying to do? I think the little fish is a girl, I think. And Jiminy tells the two fish, we're just looking for a Monstro. And both the little and Mama Fish were scared that they run away, and Jiminy was like, that got them. So anyway, Pinocchio and Jiminy are still looking for the father, right, Geppetto. Unfortunately, they encounter more fish, and of course, seahorses as well. They all say the same thing. They're all looking for Monstro the whale, including the clam. There's even a moment where Jiminy talks to a clam, asking the clam, are you acquainted with Monstro the whale? And the clam was like, nope, I'm going to eat you and spit you out. Which is what the clam did. That really sucks for Jiminy. So anyway, inside the belly of the whale, Geppetto, Figaro, and Cleo are fishing. Even they're lamenting on not seeing Pinocchio again. And then, of course, realizing that this is like their final moments at sea, right? Well, inside the belly of a whale. Unfortunately, on the outside, there are some tuna fish coming by, and Monstro wakes up. His eye opens up. He sees the tuna fish, scares him, and begins to chase them. His mouth opens as water comes in with a bunch of tuna fish coming in, and Geppetto was like, "Oh, tuna fish!" So he goes fishing for tuna fish because Geppetto doesn't have food on his boat. So then all of the fish are running away. They're swimming away from Pinocchio, but of course they're swimming away from Monstro, and Pinocchio starts to run away, including Jiminy Cricket. And of course, obviously enough, Monstro eats Pinocchio, as Pinocchio is inside the belly of a whale who finds Geppetto. But unfortunately, Jiminy Cricket is on the outside. And Jiminy Cricket was like, "Hey, Blubbermouth, open up! I gotta get in there!" Pinocchio is reunited with Geppetto, and of course they both have a conversation for a little bit. And unfortunately, it's come to realization for Geppetto that Pinocchio has ears and a tail, because unfortunately Pinocchio was on Pleasure Island, almost transformed into a donkey, including the donkey noise that Pinocchio made. And Geppetto's like, "What happened to you?" Like, Pinocchio tries to explain, but Geppetto just, was like, "No, don't worry." But anyway, we're all here now. So outside of the whale again, Jiminy tries to get in, and he was like, "I'm trying to get in! Come on, open up!" Until Jiminy gets attacked by a bunch of seagulls, and Jiminy was like, "Hey, cut it out!" He jumps into a green glass bottle, and he's like, "Oh, beat it, you bastards!" So the seagulls are trying to, like, eat Jiminy Cricket, because Jiminy Cricket's a bug, and the seagulls are trying to eat him, right? But unfortunately, the gangster seagulls failed at that. But anyway, back inside the whale, Geppetto, Pinocchio, and Cleo and Figaro. I mean, who brings a fish bowl inside the belly of a whale? Cleo is in the fishbowl inside the belly of a whale. Like, who brings a fishbowl inside the belly of a whale? But anyway, that being said, Pinocchio and Geppetto were going to eat the tuna fish, but unfortunately, this gives Pinocchio an idea to make a fire, right? Well, obviously for the tuna fish, but he made it just so he can make Monstro sneeze. And Geppetto was like, "Oh, that's going to make him mad." Which it does, because Monstro is sneezing. He was like, "Oh, oh, oh, oh." And Monstro was making was about to sneeze. And also, Thurl Ravenscroft, who played the original Tony the Tiger for Kellogg's Frosted Flakes, provides the whale noises for Monstro, just to let you know. And while he's about to sneeze, his mouth opens and Jiminy goes inside the whale, and he's like, "Well, it's about time." So Pinocchio, Geppetto, Cleo, and Figaro are on this raft as they're about to escape Monstro, and the first sneeze comes in. Unfortunately, the first sneeze wasn't enough for the four of them to escape, except for Jiminy Cricket, who is basically on a glass green bottle, saying "Kazootite," and Monstro is about to sneeze again for a second time, and the second time, he was about to eat the raft, but unfortunately, he had enough force to, push the raft away, and it actually worked, and he was about to sneeze a third time, but unfortunately, Monstro is so pissed off, he extinguishes the fire on the inside by splashing water inside his mouth, and Geppetto is like, "Look! Now he is mad," because Geppetto warned Pinocchio that the smoke is going to make Monstro angry, which it did. So Monstro chases after Pinocchio and Geppetto, and he basically wipes them out twice. He smacks the raft with his tail, and Pinocchio and Geppetto are basically in the water. So is Cleo and Figaro. But anyway, both Geppetto and Pinocchio are basically doing their best to swim to shore, but Geppetto is basically wiped out, and um, Pinocchio just takes Geppetto's body to shore. There's basically a cliffside with a cave to go in, with a cave to go in, and with a tunnel to go through. And Monstro, who is basically in a monstrous rage, swims after Pinocchio. And once they got to the cliffside, like Pinocchio tries to go inside that tunnel, and Monstro's almost there, but unfortunately the currents are basically blocking the way, making it hard for Pinocchio to get in. But anyway, Monstro jumps over the rocks, over the waves, as he's about to make his final charge, hits the tunnel that sends both Pinocchio and Geppetto inside the cave and make it all the way to shore. Geppetto at this moment is basically wiped out, and then of course Cleo and Figaro come on by and to see Geppetto still alive, and like I said, he's basically wiped out. And then Jiminy Cricket is there too, looking for Pinocchio, and then all of a sudden he finds Pinocchio's body. Pinocchio gets killed by Monstro the whale. And I'll say this, man, that whale was brutal to both Geppetto and Pinocchio. Not like how that whale in the live-action remake was like. I mean, look how they massacred my boy Monstro in the live-action remake of Pinocchio. Like, if you want to check out that review of it, I mean, I done a review of the live-action remake of Pinocchio, so if you want to check that out after this episode, go ahead. But anyway, this leads to a sad moment. This leads into a very sad moment for Geppetto, Jiminy, Cleo, and Figaro as they mourn the loss for Pinocchio, because Pinocchio is basically dead after being attacked by Monstro. But anyway, after having succeeded in proving himself brave, truthful, and unselfish, Pinocchio is revived and turned into a real human boy by the Blue Fairy, much to everyone's joy. And of course, everyone in the household celebrates. And of course, Figaro kisses Cleo inside Cleo's fishbowl. And of course, a celebration comes in. Of course, they celebrate. And Jiminy steps outside to thank the fairy and is rewarded with a solid gold badge that certifies him as an official conscience. And then we get the we get the musical number "When You Wish Upon a Star" to close out the movie. And that is basically it. That is the breakdown of Walt Disney's Pinocchio. Whew, that was a lot to say, but hey, it was obviously worth talking about. But now, let's go to my overall thoughts. Now, this movie to me holds up 85 years later. So this movie holds up. Even 85 years later, it holds up very well. I enjoy this movie. Walt Disney's Pinocchio is really good. And despite the live action remake it had, I mean, not the worst thing I saw, but that one nowhere near as good as the original animated feature film that came out in 1940. But I think the closest we're gonna get to a good animated feature film for Pinocchio will obviously be Guillermo del Toro's. Like, Guillermo del Toro's Pinocchio came out in 2022, ironically the same year as the live action remake of Pinocchio. And then of course there was also another Pinocchio movie that Pauly Shore did, but that one that one didn't do as well. But anyway, but also you also have the Roberto Benigni Pinocchio movies that also came out as well. Like, there's actually two versions. One that came out, I want to say, in the early 2000s, and then there was another one that actually came out in the late 2010s as well. But obviously the definitive one is arguably the one that came out for Walt Disney himself, which is the animated feature film in 1940. Like, the movie holds up very well, despite the moments that it has. I mean, it's got good moments. It also has got scary moments, including the creepy moments. But there's a lot of good in this movie. The animation is really, really good. The voice acting is really good too. Like, Dickie Jones and Cliff Edwards are probably the highlights of this movie as well. Like, Dickie Jones and Cliff Edwards are basically the highlights in this movie as both Pinocchio and Jiminy Cricket. The musical numbers are amazing too. I really enjoyed When You Wish Upon a Star, and of course, Hi Diddly Dee. I Got No Strings on Me, and then there's probably a couple other songs too, but hey, I love it. I love the songs. And then the animation is really and then the animation is really good, especially the water effects too. The water effects in the final act is really good too. It really reminds me of the Little Mermaid because I think the Little Mermaid used a similar effect for the underwater sequences in the Little Mermaid, which is probably the inspiration for that as well. But the story itself, the story is really good. I really enjoy the story. Sure, it's a little different compared to the book, but the story as it is, I enjoyed it. I enjoyed the story as well. All right, and if I were to rank this movie, I give it a 9 out of 10. For what it was shown in this movie, I really enjoyed it for what it is. But anyway, that's my overall thoughts. Now, to conclude this episode, we're gonna do some trivia for the remainder of this episode. So anyway, here's something that is interesting, and I mentioned this before in my live action remake, and I mentioned this before in my review of the live action Pinocchio remake, but Evelyn Venable, who was the physical model and voice of the Blue Fairy, was the model for the original Columbia Pictures logo. As we continue on, the film had a budget of $2.6 million. However, the original budget was actually $500,000. So this film's budget went up a lot, and at the time, so $2.6 million at the time was one of the most expensive films ever produced. During the musical number "When You Wish Upon a Star," when the spotlight is shown on Jiminy Cricket, there are two books. And I already mentioned this already, Peter Pan and Alice in Wonderland. And it's because Walt Disney started developing these two stories for the big screen at the time of this film's release. But World War II interrupted his plans. They were eventually released as Alice in Wonderland in 1951 and Peter Pan in 1953. And I kind of mentioned that already, but that's just to give you a little more detail. Of course, When You Wish Upon a Star became the actual theme for the Disney song, and of course the anthem as well. And of course the first animated film to win an Academy Award in a competitive category. While Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs won a special Academy Award 2 years earlier. And Jiminy Cricket, something I didn't realize, required 27 different colors. And this is something I also didn't realize either, continuing on with Jiminy Cricket. The task of creating Jiminy Cricket was given to Ward Kimball, his first assignment as an animation director. He originally designed the character to look more like a real cricket. But Walt Disney found the result too gross and demanded he be made to be cute. Kimball ultimately removed all the insect-like features and turned Jiminy into a little green man with an oversized head, wearing a gentlemanly outfit the animator borrowed from the logo of Johnny Walker's Scotch whiskey. Disney was pleased, even though the character no longer resembled a bug. In later years, Kimball expressed unhappiness with the compromises in Jiminy's design, saying the audience accepts him as a cricket because the other characters say he is. And of course, Figaro the cat was Walt Disney's favorite character. Disney pushed for the kitten to appear in the film as much as possible. And after the film, Disney decided to make Figaro Minnie Mouse's pet cat, starting with first Aiders in 1944. Figaro also got his own series of cartoons beginning with Figaro and Cleo in 1943. He would have 4 cartoons of his own, 2 appearances in the Pluto cartoon series, and appear in the promotional animated wartime short All Together, which came out in 1942. And then, of course, working models for all of Geppetto's cuckoo clocks were built as guides for the animators. And then, of course, there is a behind-the-scenes controversy for one of the actors, so this is a little bit of controversial territory. But unfortunately, Christian Rubb, who played Geppetto in this movie, and this is also in accordance to Jack Kinney, the sequence director, Christian Rubb was a Nazi sympathizer who drove the animation crew crazy with his ramblings about the glories of Adolf Hitler. And and also something to keep in mind, this movie was made at a different time period, and of course that time period was during World War II. So that's something to keep in mind, and and this is surprising to me because I didn't realize Christian Rubb was a Nazi sympathizer, but unfortunately the animators got even with Christian Rubb when they did the live action shooting for the scene with Geppetto fishing from inside Monstro the whale. They put Rubb on a makeshift stage where he pretended to fish while the stage was jolted by some grips who rocked the boat to get the desired effect and gave Rubb a ride he never forgot. So there's something to get even with. And here's another trivia for you. When Honest John attempts to coax Pinocchio to go to Pleasure Island, he gives him a card with an ace of spades on it, calling it his ticket. In popular myth and folklore, the ace of spades is referred to as the death card. Actually did not know that card was basically the death card because it has an ace, right? It has an ace of spades. Wow, the Joker really won in this game. So that means Honest John put an ace in the hole, or an ace, or an ace on the ticket, right? So he took the wooden boy and brought him down on the path of Honest John. It wasn't hard, but it's like gravity. All it takes is a little push. You know. So Honest John found an ace in the hole by giving him the ace card, which is basically the death card. Wow, and an ace of spades. Wow. Oh, that makes the ending even much more crazy now. Oh man, talk about foreshadowing Pinocchio's death in that movie. But thankfully, Pinocchio came back to life, so that's pretty good. So at least that movie had a good ending. And here's something about Honest John and Gideon. They were supposed to meet Pinocchio a third time and be caught by the police after he rejects them. And we don't see Honest John and Gideon again after the two take Pinocchio to the coachman, right? Yes, they were both caught by the police. They basically broke the law. The two broke the law and they're basically thrown into jail after rejecting the two's offer, right? So anyway, just to move forward, John Musker and Ron Clements would consult on how Pinocchio achieved its underwater effects when they were in the process of developing The Little Mermaid, which came out in 1989. And of course, early attempts at creating the sound of Pinocchio talking underwater involved Dickie Jones trying to talk with water in his mouth. When this proved unsuccessful, other methods to create the sound were sought. The success method was a specially designed microphone with a coiled internal wire and paddles which distorted the sound enough to give the watery effect. And then, of course, the film was reissued in 1992 after a year of meticulous restoration, which included cleaning and removing scratches from the original negatives frame by frame, eliminating distortions on the soundtrack, and revitalizing the color. And then the Blue Fairy was created using the rotoscope technique. Lampwick is a caricature of Disney animator Fred Moore. And also, it's estimated that 2 million drawings were created during production, with a total of 300,000 used in the final film. For Walt Disney picked up his honorary Oscar statuettes for Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs, and he told the Academy Award audience about Pinocchio, which was still in production, holding their attention for a full 25 minutes. And then also, here's the thing, it is commonly perceived that Pinocchio was the first Disney animated feature film to be released on video in 1985. In reality, that honor goes to Dumbo in 1941 and 1980. There are 3 possible reasons for this misconception. For one, home video was at its infancy in 1980, but was taking off by 1985. Another reason was the strength of the advertising campaign for Pinocchio's video debut, which was the largest campaign for a single title at the time. Finally, the Walt Disney Studios had made past statements about that none of their animated films would be released on video. Nevertheless, the success of Pinocchio on video was the breakthrough moment in the history of Walt Disney home video. And I have the video, and I have the the movie on home video, but I don't use home video anymore. I mean, I have the DVD, which came out in the late 2000s and early 2010s. And also, I mentioned it was a box office bomb. It didn't start recouping some of its costs until its 1945 re release. And then, Strombo's Wagon was a filmed model printed on cells and painted. A similar technique was used 21 years later in 101 Dalmatians. And going back to Stromboli, well, technically not Stromboli herself, but inside Carriage, when Pinocchio is locked in the cage and the blue fairy comes to rescue him, he lies about being captured by a big green monster. This actually happened in one scene in the 1883 novel. A fisherman with green skin, a green beard, green eyes, and green grass for hair mistakes Pinocchio for a fish and prepares to eat him. And speaking of fish, the big fish that eats Geppetto and Pinocchio was actually a dogfish, not a whale, but it kind of does resemble a whale a little bit. But in the original novel, it is basically a huge dogfish and not a whale. But I kind of like the whale a lot more in the original Pinocchio movie, to be fair, though. And here's another interesting trivia for you. Originally, the donkey Lampwick was supposed to join Pinocchio and Jiminy in their escape from Pleasure Island, but is caught by the coach's minions. And as he is being carried away, says, "Go on, save yourselves, I'm a goner." Some storybook adaptations keep the scene. In the original novel, the donkey Lampwick was sold to a miller, while Pinocchio, who turns into a donkey completely, is sold to a circus. But later, after saving Geppetto from Monstro, Pinocchio goes to that same miller to get a glass of milk for Geppetto, and after Pinocchio turns the water wheel, he comes across Donkey Lampwick before he dies. And then I mentioned a chair where it actually has a donkey logo on it, and the chair that Pinocchio sits on during the pool scene has a carving of a donkey, which is what the boys turn into. And like I said, that's good foreshadowing right there. And Honest John and Gideon are generally shocked when the coachman brings up Pleasure Island to them, hinting that the park is cursed to turn bad boys into donkeys the longer they stay there. And like I said, that was a creepy scene. That was the creepiest scene to come out of this movie. And like I said, and of course, obviously, the coachman's carriage to Pleasure Island is driven by actual donkeys, which is what the boys turn into on Pleasure Island. And that is basically it for the trivia. And there you have it, folks. That is my take on Walt Disney's Pinocchio. I would say that was a lot to talk about in this episode, but for an animated classic from Walt Disney that is 85 years old, it is worth talking about. I mean, let's be honest. I grew up watching this movie on home video and then DVD, but man, there was a lot to talk about. But anyway, that is my take for Walt Disney's Pinocchio. And to anybody who is tuning into this on YouTube, make sure to hit the like and subscribe button to tune in for more content. This episode and the overall Codo Cinema podcast is on Spotify and Podbean as well. So anyway, there you have it, folks. So what did you guys think of Walt Disney's Pinocchio that came out in 1940? Did you like this movie? Did you not like this movie? Did you think this movie was okay? Did you think this movie holds up after 85 years? I would love to hear your thoughts. But anyway, that is a wrap on this episode. Thank you all for tuning into Codo Cinema. I'm your host, Mark Codo, aka Codoman. Remember to watch movies and stay positive.